All right, guys, I wanted to make a quick video to kind of walk you through this first practice FRQ you did, a concept application question. So this should look familiar to all of you, what you're seeing on the screen now. A couple quick things. The concept application questions are going to test your, as the name suggests, how well you understand some of the concepts of government. Now, often, not always, but often this will require you to show your knowledge of the different branches and what they do. This particular question included interest groups, which are a linkage institution, which was covered in one of the units that won't be on the exam. So I can't say for sure that, you know, you wouldn't see anything about interest groups on this modified exam, but my understanding is you won't. I don't think that should have made this question any harder for you, but just keep in mind that we'll probably see a need to, we'll have to demonstrate our understanding of how the branches work, how they work together, the separation of powers, checks and balances. Of course, another concept could be, federalism, or something that we're learning now in Unit 7, the doctrine of incorporation, understanding of civil liberties, civil rights. Really anything can come up in these questions. So what we want to demonstrate in the exam is that we understand, how government works, how this stuff works. So this question I chose because it related to the material we had just finished up in Unit 6, dealing with the bureaucracy. So let's look at the question again together. Then I'm going to walk you through kind of the scoring rubric, how it is scored, what we're looking for in the response. And I'm hoping that this will help you see how you did. I won't be able to provide you the individual feedback that would be ideal. So watch this video, watch it twice if you need to get an idea of how to do these. This question has 3 parts, and it is scored out of 3 points. And as I had mentioned previously in another video, this is 40% of your exam score coming from this one question. So with each point, being 1/3 of this, you're talking like 13% of your exam coming from each part of this question. We really cannot afford to make a silly mistake. We want to be very clear, use government vocabulary, really understand the question, do everything it's asking us to do to earn those points. So let's walk through the question again. First, I know I advise you to read the questions first, and we should do that so we know what it is we're looking for as we read the scenario. Then we want to read the scenario itself. So the first thing we're looking for is the function being carried out by the FCC. So you need to recognize that the FCC is a bureaucratic agency, it's part of the bureaucracy, and that it's in this scenario, it's exercising one of its functions. Well, bureaucracies, we know they enforce or carry out the law, but more specifically, they do that by often creating rules and regulations for how that law will be carried out. So Congress passes a law, but that law is often vague, and then the agency can create rules and regulations within it. And that's what they're looking for here. So notice as we read the scenario, it says in May 2017, the FCC announced a proposal to repeal net neutrality rules that govern how internet service providers treat internet traffic. Under net neutrality rules, so twice they've used the word rules, companies that sell internet services to customers must provide access to all websites at the same speed. Without net neutrality, internet service companies can charge consumers or websites a premium for high-speed access to certain sites. So we got a lot of detail in there, detail about this particular net neutrality rule, but it doesn't necessarily relate to our question. We just want to know what function they're carrying out. So we have to recognize there, and they're hinting by continually using the word rules, that this is the FCC carrying out its rule-making function. Okay. As we start to read the second paragraph, we might recognize this from our lesson on how the bureaucracy works. It says, as required by statute, statute is another word for law, the FCC opened up the proposed rule for public comment. So we had talked about that process, how they propose rules and then there's a comment period, and then ultimately those rules go into effect. Okay, I'm going to show you again the notes that I provided you. This is functions of the federal bureaucracy. And right here, this second bullet talks about developing rules and regulations to implement legislative policy. Okay. The process itself is spelled out here. This is done through a process called rulemaking, which is lengthy and complicated. And then it walks through how that works. The agency must give public notice. Interested parties have the right to comment. Then the final rules are published. And of course, these rules, like anything, can be challenged in court. It can be subject to judicial review. Okay? So that's what this question is getting at. Then it asks, how can interest groups affect the process described in Part A? So now here's the key. Obviously, we need to have done well in Part A. We need to recognize that what the FCC is doing is rulemaking. Okay, that's going to earn us the point for Part A. Then in Part B, we have to stay very focused. How can interest groups affect the process described in Part A? How can interest groups affect the rulemaking process? Now, you might say, well, we didn't really talk about that specifically. No, we didn't. When we talked about interest groups months ago, you had no idea what bureaucratic rulemaking was. And when we talked about in these videos what rulemaking was, we didn't really get into much how interest groups work. So here you need to think a little bit, connect some dots, use some logic. But there's hints in the question. So it says here in the second paragraph, the FCC opened up the proposed rule for public comment. And we saw in our notes that interested parties have the right to provide comments. So interest groups could themselves comment on these proposed rules, or interest groups could encourage their members to comment on these proposed rules. So that's primarily what they're looking for there. I'm not going to say there aren't other possibilities, but that would be the most obvious thing. Interest groups could themselves or encourage their members to comment on these proposed rules. Again, we want to keep all of this referencing the scenario. So, maybe we might want to say interested interest groups could encourage their members to comment on the FCC's rules about repealing net neutrality. Okay, that should earn us the point. Then finally, it says December 2017, the FCC created the rule. So again, a strong hint as to what that function is in Part A. The FCC created the rule ending net neutrality. Okay, so they've gone through the process, they've created this rule, they received public comments, and then they finalized the rule and they ended the net neutrality rules. Explain how Congress could respond to the decision made by the FCC if it opposes the new rule. Well, what you got to remember here is that ultimately Congress is in control of policymaking. So this is actually rather simple. Normally when we're asked how could Congress respond, well, what does Congress do? They make laws. So something as simple as Congress could pass a law that overrides the FCC rule. That would take care of it, right? That would be a response if they oppose the new rule. They could restore net neutrality by law, okay? Remember, why does the FCC or any bureaucratic agency have rulemaking power in the first place? Well, it's because Congress doesn't want to get into the details sometimes in a law. They create broader, maybe more vague laws, and they let the bureaucrats, who are the so-called experts, they let them kind of fill in the details and figure out how things are going to work out. Well, Congress certainly could step back in and say, we don't like the rule you've made. We're going to pass a law that changes that. And then that is the law. Okay, Congress has the fundamental authority to make laws, to make policies, so they can override any bureaucratic agency's ability to make rules. So that's what they would be looking for there in Part C. It's actually a rather simple idea. Congress could pass a law. Okay, we know that's Congress's most basic function. Now it's just important that we connect it to this scenario. Congress could pass a law that would change the FCC's rule, restore net neutrality. Okay, so notice each of those responses is actually rather simple. Several short sentences in each part would definitely get the job done. Okay, I hope you see now how really easy this could be, and we really can't afford to miss one of those points. I mean, certainly if you get 2 out of the 3, I still think you'd be in pretty good shape to do well on the exam, but we don't want to take any chances. And of course, the argument essay is going to be out of 7 with a little more wiggle room there, but each point won't be worth as much. These are worth so much that we certainly want to get every point we can. So I'm going to show you a scoring rubric for this question. It does not mean these are the only possible responses, but for the most part, this is what they're looking for. In Part A, there really is only one right answer. You see here under acceptable description, the FCC is carrying out its rule-making function in regulating the net neutrality rule or ending the net neutrality rule. Okay, rule-making function, or the creation of rules and regulations. Okay, that's what we call that function. But that's key. That's what, in looking at your responses, I'm looking to see rulemaking or rules and regulations. Okay, that's specific. Part B, in the context of the scenario, explain how an interest group can affect the process described in A. How can an interest group influence the rule-making process? Interest groups can organize people to comment on the proposed rule. That's what I had mentioned. We didn't mention this, but it also makes good logical sense. Remember, interest groups often try to shape public opinion, so they could certainly create an ad campaign to try to influence public opinion about the proposed change, which, of course, should lead people to comment or maybe to put pressure on Congress to change this if they don't like it. But those are 2 things, think. A great way to review for this exam is just think, what are the basic things that each branch of government does? The policy-making institutions, what are their most basic functions? And then likewise, with linkage institutions, if in fact we can use them on the exam or need to use them on the exam, what are their basic functions? Okay. And then finally, Part C says the FCC created this rule ending net neutrality. Explain how Congress could respond to the decision if it opposes the new rule. So we want to make sure that Congress is going to do something that shows that they don't like the new rule and they're going to try to change it. So they mentioned that Congress could call on members of the FCC to testify before a committee to discuss the reasons for the proposed rule. Okay, so we did talk about this in our video lessons on the bureaucracy. Congress will also often exercise oversight. They'll hold hearings where they call the heads of various agencies to testify and explain why they're doing what they're doing. Okay, so that's one way to Congress kind of put pressure on the FCC. Here's the one we went with, the second bullet. Congress can pass a law that would override the rule. Okay, real simple. And then that's what I would go with. That's the easy one. And then honestly, we did not discuss this last one. Congress can use the Congressional Review Act to overturn the rule. No need. We don't, it's a little more detail than I wanted to give you. We don't need it. We only need one of these responses. And I think it's great advice with the exam to just keep things simple. Stick with the most basic, simple functions, basic, simple concepts. Don't try to get too cute and pull something out of left field. Sometimes you run into trouble when you do that. Okay, so I hope this was helpful and it gives you an understanding of how you did on that FRQ. I recorded your scores in a progress book. I won't be able to give you that individual feedback. There might be opportunities in office hours to raise questions about this if you're still not sure why you may have missed a point. All right.